Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we have our usual roundup of the big stories around the world relevant to the Sikh community. Then we'll take a look in more detail at one particular story making headlines. And of course, we've talked a lot recently about the terrible floods inundating Punjab. And now regularly hitting the mainstream narrative is the accusation that these are deliberate attempts to weaponise the monsoon by the Indian government in Delhi to destroy both Sikh Punjab and Pakistan. And yes, even one of Hindutva's favourite mouthpieces, Major Araya, is even admitting to it on their behalf. Well, we'll examine some of these accusations in more detail. All this and more on today's show, but joining me, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. Thanks, everyone who's been checking out our Substack. I'm hoping that you're enjoying that, and we will be posting continually on Substack after the show. We actually, sometimes it'll be before, sometimes after. I have it scheduled to be posted at 4 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so this way I can be in bed while it's posting and I don't have to stay up. No offense, but that's the way it is. But send your comments if you're enjoying the Substack, or check it out if you haven't already. Back to you, Angus.
Indeed, yes, please do that. And James and I, meanwhile, together, will be bringing you our perspectives on the news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we'll take a look at loads of those great comments at the end of the show, so do stay tuned for that. Right, James, lots to get through this morning. What are you going to start us off today?
That we do. We've got headlines from around the world, and we're going to give a shout out to a couple of actually our communities that we don't normally talk about. So we wanted to include them here because we're finding, or at least I am, that we are getting people from around the world. And a part of that, I reach out on Facebook. I'm a member of many of the Sikh groups that are in Japan and Singapore and all over the world. So it's great to be able to acknowledge them. So we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And we are going to do a news roundup from around the world. And a part of that will be coming from those communities such as Singapore. Not often we talk about the Sikh community there. And again, it is a learning process for Angus and I as we are continually learning about the Sikh community's impact and contributions to communities around the world and the history, which is quite fascinating. Now, a recent high-profile visit from Singapore's Prime Minister. Yes, he has made his way to visit with Modi. And this could be seen as a positive or a negative, depending on how you look at the trade and all of that. But it was a very proud moment for the Sikh community in Singapore. Now, let's just backtrack a bit that this visit has marked a significant step forward in the relationship between the two nations, as this particular resonance for the Sikh community in both countries. Now, as I say, the discussion centered on economic cooperation, technological partnerships, and of course, strategic alignment and security in the region. But they also highlighted the deep cultural and historical ties that bind both nations. Now, for decades, Singapore has been a vital hub for the Sikh diaspora. The community has established itself as an integral part of Singapore's multicultural fabric. Now, they have been contributing significantly to the economic and social landscape of that region. The visit reaffirmed the importance of the connection, and leaders from both nations acknowledged the role of the Sikh community as a living bridge, as they termed it, fostering goodwill and mutual understanding. Now, this is, of course, a moment of pride, but behind the official handshakes and the policy discussions that went on, the visit also served to underscore the shared values of harmony and progress. The Prime Minister of India lauded the contributions of the Sikhs in Singapore, pointing out their success in business, public service, and of course the military as a testament to the community's industrious and principled nature. Now, for Sikhs in both nations, this high-level recognition is a moment of pride and one of encouraging signs that really is a symbol of continued strong and respectful bilateral ties. The visit concluded with a renewed agreement on trade and defense, promising a future of even closer collaboration. Now, of course, this is more surprising coming from Modi than it is from the Singapore Prime Minister. But again, it shows that at least in the international world, it is a sign of respect, even even as we talk about the history and the cultures. Now, as we shift along, let's jump over to Japan, another diaspora that we don't pay enough attention to, Angus. It is not a very large one in the scope of some of them, but again, it is a vital one to that region because the Gurdwara in Kobe, Japan, has served as a beacon of community and religious involvement in the community in Kobe, Japan, but also as one of the first and the one of the only Gurdwaras in the region for many decades. It served not only as a hub for the immediate community, but they would have people visit, Sikhs that is, visiting from all parts of Japan. And again, they recently celebrated their 100th anniversary. Now, if memory serves me correct, this is actually the image that you're going to see throughout the show here is actually a newer Sikh Gurdwara that was built, I believe 1966 was the opening of this particular one. But prior to that, it had taken place in other facilities that were not actually owned by the community. So they were owned by members of the community, but not as a society and not as a regular Gurdwara, as a freestanding building of their own. So again, a very huge point in history, celebrating that 100 years. And of course, when you look back, the first area was settled by a lot of the Sikh community in Japan were there in Kobe. And that was, the people who were merchants and traders. At that time, that was a bustling port city, and it still is to the most extent. So it really welcomed a lot of different people. Now, the Gurdwara there stands as a testament to that community's resilience and the pioneering spirit. Now, keep in mind that they have been through a lot in terms of history in Japan, and that is just another celebration as to why it is such a historical point that it still stands. You have to remember the Great Harshan earthquake of 1995. During that earthquake, of course, as it would be known, the Gurdwara was famously opened and that welcomed people from all over the area, not only in terms of the Sikhs, but everybody was there. They actually had fed thousands of people who had been displaced by the earthquake. So again, just shows that, it doesn't matter where the Sikhs are, they are always working to help others. And of course, they refer to that as Sarbat Dabala, and that is welfare for all. And again, when you look at Langar or the free community meals, again, this is a central pillar to not only looking after the community, but really offering an olive branch, so to speak, that they want people to feel welcome. They want people to understand their culture, their religion, but also in a respectful way, respecting others. And I think that's one of the beauties of it, is that it helps to bridge that gap. And again, with more awareness, with more understanding, comes more compassion and less racism and less, mystery between communities. So I think that is a true testament of the times that they have stood through with the Japanese and everybody else in that community. So again, congratulations on 100 years, and hopefully another 100 years will be just as fruitful in terms of the relationships that have been built in those communities. Now, moving on to the United States. Now, last week, San Fernando Valley opened up their Day of Sava. Yes, they were out feeding and helping the public, but they also went further. They were helping to clean up the community, picking up garbage, and just really bringing the community together, as well as feeding the homeless. They also went out and planted trees in the city parks. So it just really shows the depth of which the Sikh community gives back. They, on top of all of that, organized the blood drive as well. And that, of course, with the long weekend coming up and all of the events going on, it's important to remember that all throughout the year, the blood banks around the world rely on the donation of blood to rescue or to save lives. And so again, it's just not only about that community, but even by us discussing it on the show here, Angus, it brings a lot of awareness. So if you have a blood drive in your community or just the local, here in Canada, we have the Red Cross and the Canadian Blood Services Society. So different places where you can donate blood. And, it's a great way to help save lives. Now, this event was a vibrant display of a community spirit in action. The volunteers gathered at the local Gurdwara in the early morning for prayers, and then they dispersed to various project sites. One of the cornerstone activities for this particular year, because this is an annual event, was the preparation and distribution of thousands of hot meals. And of course, the homeless issue is one that is impacting San Fernando Valley, just as it is across Canada, across the US, and all over the world when we look at the current economy. A lot of people are struggling. And therefore, you have the working poor, you have others as well who may be unhoused, but again, they could be working a lot of hours and such, trying to get, something going for themselves in terms of housing and accommodation. But it's a tough world out there right now. Especially if you look at places like Vancouver, some of the highest real estate in the country here in Metro Vancouver, which really contributes to the housing shortage, or at least the affordability of housing in this region. So again, just big shout out to all the Sikhs in the San Fernando Valley. Great job. And again, we love the community of San Fernando. I've been there many a times, and maybe I'll have to go there in the winter and get away from the Canadian summer. I don't know. But as we move on here, the Canadian Sikh Federation again is raising concerns over the diplomatic ties with India and the reinstatement of the different envoys between Canada and India. Now, as this moves on, it's been a fragile reset that's just beginning now. However, the World Sikh Organization and other organizations are still very concerned that the government of Canada seems to be not holding India to make any public announcements or statements from either side in direct relation to the transnational repression and foreign interference that we're seeing across Canadian cities. Once again, we'll keep an eye on that, but we have to wait and see how that plays. I did speak with one government representative who claims that there is, or one political representative who claims there are talks behind the scenes that are not being made public at the request of both of the parties involved. And of course, that would be, law enforcement, international organizations, as well as Indian representatives and government attaches as well. So there are discussions going on still with the investigation into the involvement of individuals in India. But again, a very tough process to move forward on, and one that the World Sikh Organization and the rest of the country needs to continue to hold the government accountable to make sure they address this issue with India. Failing to address it with India would only invite more transnational repression and foreign interference by not only India, but we also have concerns about Russia, China, Iran, and so many others. So it's important that this is resolved and comes public, because if it's not made public, then it really is just lip service between government officials, and that's not where we need to be. We need to make sure that it is in a public sphere and that everybody sees what's going on, and that there is that level of transparency that really needs to be there, especially in this day and age when everybody knows what India is doing. And to not hold them accountable in the public eye means that we need to question what our representatives are doing for us in this nation. Now, with that said, ironically, the Canadian government has actually, I just got this in the mail today, and this is a survey on Canadian safety and how the public feels about our safety in the country. So I'll make sure that I fill that out for Stats Canada, or Statistics Canada, for those unfamiliar. But yeah, again, I'll keep you updated if there's anything about transnational repression or anything when I do the survey. But moving on, again, another town that we don't talk about, or small city in Canada, is Winnipeg in the very cold cold winters of Manitoba, you have the people in Winnipeg who get buried under 10, 12, 20 feet of snow. Okay, maybe it's not that bad, but it's pretty damn cold there in the wintertime. But that is why they are having their events as summer wraps up. They have recently held the big, colorful, and exciting Niagara Curtain in Winnipeg, where the community got together. Very peaceful, very loving, and of course welcoming. You can see in the images, if you go online and take a look, whether it is the news video or the still images, that it is, of course, the Sikh community out there in thousands of counts, but also the rest of the community as well, coming out to celebrate alongside and with them. So again, bringing the city of Winnipeg to the forefront of the news with the international world saying, hey, where the heck is Winnipeg and why haven't I heard about it before? Well, it's because it is a small city in the prairie provinces of Canada. And if you ever get the chance, go in the summertime and not the winter. But the people are amazing there, so you will really enjoy it. As we talk about travel, Angus, Surrey is going to be hosting the prestigious International Sikh Research Summit that's coming to town in just a few weeks here. And I have requested to be there so that I can talk to people and get some background as well as interviews with different representatives from the Research Council, from people representing all different levels of the historic communities, the philosophy, contemporary issues that they deal with and talk about and research through these events. So again, that's coming up, I believe, the 21st to the 23rd of the month, and I'll double check the dates on that. But so this is a prestigious event that happens annually. It's, I believe, the 4th or 5th year now that this has happened. So it's pretty exciting to see it back in Surrey, and I will be there to bring reports, but also if people are in Surrey or planning to visit the region and are interested, there will be all kinds of workshops and events as well that you can take a look at, and it'll give you a much deeper understanding, hopefully, of Sikhism, of Sikhi, and again, you'll be able to talk with all of these different, learned minds, and hopefully get some new perspectives on different cultural issues, historical issues, social issues, and so forth. So again, I'm excited to go out and attend that and speak with the different people in attendance. We'll keep an eye on that, and I'll give you a reminder before the date of it happening, just to remind everybody that it's going on. And as we take a look at the area of Jammu and Kashmir, yes, they are moving forward with a big commemoration planned for the 350th Martyrdom Day of Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji in Jammu and Kashmir, happening in November this year. Even with all of the struggles and the strife going on in the region, they are moving forward to have the big commemoration. Now, the series of events are being planned across the region to commemorate the 350th anniversary of the martyrdom, as I said. And, of course, the events are being organized to pay homage to the Guru's supreme sacrifice and to reflect the teaching of the religious freedom and human rights. Now, as you take a look at that, he was martyred in 1675 for defending the rights of Kashmiri Pandits to practice their religion freely. Sounds familiar. Of course, we know that that is, again, something that we've spoken about many times, including just a few minutes ago when we mentioned about the respect that Sikhi has for other religions and encouraging others to be the best they can be, no matter where they come from or which pew they worship at. So again, just a quick note for you there. And finally, Angus, of course, Adani, the big scandal is still going on, but the funny thing is they can't serve him. The problem that the SEC has right now, and they have for the last several months, is that they've had to go through a certain process of serving not only Adani himself, but his nephew, and of course the official contacts within the Adani group. Now, the SEC, or the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, has informed the federal court that it's ongoing, that they are attempting, but so far unsuccessful, to have the legal documents served on Gautam Adani and his nephew Cigar Adani. The agency is navigating with complexities because they have to actually go through with the international laws that are in place, and that means utilizing the Hague's Service Convention, and therefore they're relying on the Indian Ministry of Law and Justice to actually proceed and to process those papers to deliver them. And we know how that works with Indian law enforcement, that it could be a cold day in hell before they get served. So again, we'll keep an eye on that, because the other thing is that there's also been political circles that are paying attention to it, as 6 different representatives from the Congress in the U.S. have requested Pam Bondi to look into the whole investigation and see if it was just a witch hunt by the Biden administration, as they are trying to shape it up to being. And they characterized it as a witch hunt. And again, we've heard those words many a times, and the term misguided crusade is another one that they throw around. Now, adding to the complexities of the situation, of course, President Donald Trump has signed an executive order pausing the enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And that, of course, is widely seen as potentially damaging to the SEC's case or the process going after the Adani Group. However, it should be clarified that this is not a criminal case. This is a civil matter, and therefore that falls under civil jurisdiction. Again, that opens it up to a bit more flexibility. And of course, at the current time, the SEC is saying that they are moving forward. They have some roadblocks ahead, including this of the difficulty of providing service, but they will not be dropping the lawsuit, that they intend to move ahead as they have in the past with other cases of similar incidents, but not on this scale, Angus.
Yes, indeed. I'm sure the Adani family will be sort of sniggering away, thinking they're going to get away with it. Well, I can assure you that certainly if I was a corrupt businessman, I would not want the SEC on my tail, because they tend to get their man in the end. So just a warning to those guys.
A
couple of stories. Absolutely, yeah. And a couple of stories I would like to pick up on and talk about that you mentioned there. And I think a really important one there is talk about the diaspora communities. Of course, the Sikh community has a huge diaspora right around the world, and we often we tend to focus on the larger diasporas of North America, Europe, and what have you, and Australia, New Zealand. But of course, we do have audience members all over the world in the most weird and wonderful places. I think with Malaysia we know, and I think somebody even mentioned the Pacific Islands. So as we often say, do let us know if you are in a relatively unusual, smaller diaspora community. Let us know where you're watching from. It's always very interesting to know where you are. And of course, Singapore, it's a huge, important commercial hub. And this actually really moves on to, I suppose, another aspect, another angle to this story about the diaspora is that India as a whole has massive diaspora communities all around the world. And these communities are really important. Not least, just many of them are just ordinary Indians just trying to make a living, and so they can send money back home to keep their families out of or above the poverty line. But what it has actually, and what we've discovered, particularly in places like North America and Europe, these diaspora communities are quite powerful. They're growing. They've entered, as many of the Sikh community have. They've got involved in local politics. They've got involved in commerce, in business, in industry, in academia, etc. And when they start to push their own agenda, it starts to become an issue. And of course, we often talk about the Hindu community in North America. And of course, by that extension, I'm talking about the Hindutva agenda. And again, it's a huge issue that we directly have suffered from this Hindutva agenda, particularly in North America, because these powerful Indian diaspora communities, they have individuals working in all sorts of important places, key places. And of course, Silicon Valley being a prime example, we do know that the big tech companies, Facebook, Google, etc., they have large Indian populations working in their companies. And of course, many of those individuals report back to Hindutva, or they are essentially de facto agents of Hindutva. And as a result, they control a lot of power in these companies, which is why channels like us are shadow banned, which is why we were demonetized, etc. Because there are people in Google clearly working under the Hindu agenda, under instructions to shadow ban channels like us. We weren't demonetized for any real genuine reason. We of course appealed, and of course that appeal got thrown out. It's because the decision makers are heavily influenced by these diaspora communities. They hold positions of influence and power, and Silicon Valley is just one example of many areas. Another good example is in the UK. Here we had a practicing Hindu Prime Minister. Now, he is, of course, a British citizen, etc., but ultimately his roots, and of course his wife's roots, very much from India. So again, you can see how these diaspora communities have such a huge influence upon the countries and the nations and the societies that they end up in. So this is why there's nothing wrong with that until they start pushing an agenda that is not necessarily in the interests of that nation. And again, we've talked to James about Canada and the investigations into foreign influence in Canadian politics and Canadian society. Of course, then they uncovered all sorts of influence from Hindutva through the diaspora communities, and those diaspora communities have infiltrated academia and industry and politics, etc., and are pushing that same agenda. So this is, again, it's something that really should concern us. And of course, these diaspora communities exist in all the main commercial hubs of the world. I mean, we talked about Singapore. You talked about how important Singapore is. Singapore is in the Asian region, is one of the key commercial hubs of Asia. India, of course, trying to take control in competition with China, trying to control that Asian region. Well, they've got a large diaspora community in Singapore. Likewise, the Middle East, UAE, one of the largest populations in the UAE are Indians. Now, of course, sadly in the UAE, most of those Indians are literally living on the poverty line, but not all of them. Many of them are serving in industry at very high levels. So again, you can see how these diaspora communities are really, really gaining footholds in all the key commercial areas and in important political areas, geopolitically speaking. So yeah, we need to keep an eye on that. And then the second story is, of course, and I touched upon this yesterday. Yeah, James, very close to you. Canadian politics and this changing stance of the Canadian government and its attitude towards India. Now, of course, as I said yesterday, when Justin Trudeau was in power, it was very unambiguous. India breached international law. It targeted Hardeep Singh Nijjar and murdered him. It's a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil using proxy killers on the ground. The Indian state murdered a Canadian citizen. Justin Trudeau stood up in Parliament and called it out for what it was. An absolute outrage, an international outrage. He expelled diplomats as a result, as he rightly should have done, etc., etc. Now, along comes Mark Carney. I mean, if you're a regular viewer of the show, you'll know my opinion of Mark Carney. Well, this is no surprise, and I did sadly predict the way things are going. And the Sikh Federation of Canada have rightly and unsurprisingly called out what is going on with Mark Carney. And they're saying, look, hang on a second, India are guilty of these huge, obvious, unambiguous breaches of human rights, not just in India, but indeed in Canada with their actions of transnational repression. And what's Mark Carney's government doing about it? They're shaking hands and welcoming India back into the fold. And they're renewing the diplomatic ties. Now, of course, we all know what it's about. It's all about globalism. It's all about money and commerce, etc. India, the largest market on the planet, etc., etc. Yeah, in other words, once again, it comes back to the age-old, tired argument of is it money or is it human rights? And sadly, money always seems to win in the end. And that is clearly what's happening. And this, of course, has a massive impact, a really significant impact on Canada's Sikh community. Because, of course, in the past, we've had issues of India trying to extradite khalistan activists from Canada. They claim they are terrorists, and they've moved heaven and earth to try and get Canada to extradite these khalistan activists to India. We know what will happen to them if they ever, God forbid, ever get sent back to India. We'll never see them again. But that is what's happening. And with renewed friendships between the Canadian government and India, it then does imply that the Indian intelligence agencies, RAW, are going to have closer ties with the Canadian intelligence agencies, CSIS. And that means there will be more traffic of information, of intelligence. That means there is a worry that CSIS will start sending Indian intelligence, more intelligence about the Sikh community. And that's the last thing that the Sikh community in Canada wants. The last thing that they want, obviously, is India to know what on earth that they're going on in their private lives. India uses that information to exert its transnational oppression. And of course, then it comes back to the old story about the Air India bombing, Kanishka bombing. Now, we're trying very hard, and a lot of people on the ground in Canada are trying very hard to reopen the investigation. We know what's going to happen with that. India is going to pressure Canada to shut it down because the narrative is set. India set the narrative. It was Khalistani activists, Khalistani terrorists. Well, in reality, the evidence has increasingly pointed to the fact it was a false flag operation by Indian intelligence. Of course, India's going to want to close that down. And sadly, with increasing diplomatic ties, Carney's government is more likely then to say, you know what, let's bury that uncomfortable potential story. So again, that whole renewed friendship, let's call it, between India and Canada for the sake of trade deals, I think is very concerning, James. And I think the Sikh community need to really keep that pressure on the Canadian government to go back, to start backtracking. And it's all very well saying, as they have been saying, oh, you know, we're on them about human rights. Nonsense. What's India going to do? It'll do what it's always done, is ignore it. It's appeasement, basically. And we all know what happens when appeasement is rolled out by any government. It just fails wholeheartedly. So sadly, James, I think that is a very, very concerning development in Canada.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, too, you mentioned the Air India incident and the desire for a lot of us to see that reopened. Now, it was one of the most expensive investigations and trials in Canadian history. And it still remains open as an open case because nobody has really been held accountable yet. Now, I also think that in the legal circles, that is another way the government gets around actually releasing any new evidence or any other evidence that wasn't public knowledge already. And that is because it's an open case. They don't want to release information that could jeopardize any future prosecutions or such. So I think sometimes it's used as a way to withhold information that could be pertinent to the public interest, Angus.
Indeed it is. So, we'll have to keep an eye on that. And so well done to the Canadian Sikh Federation for raising that whole issue. Of course, I've no doubt they will be keeping that pressure on, as they rightly should be doing. Okay, James, I'm going to move on to my story that I want to look in more detail. And we have, of course, talked a lot over recent days, in fact, even weeks, sadly, about the dreadful flooding that's inundating northwestern India and Pakistan. Well, of course, the accusations are flying wildly around across social media and now even hitting the mainstream that these floods that occur every single year, almost without fail, and particularly bad this year, there is an accusation flying around that it is actually deliberate. It's not just simple incompetence, but it is a deliberate tactic by Delhi to target its enemies. And those enemies, of course, firstly, Pakistan, where most of the floods are causing the worst damage, but of course against the Sikh community in the Punjab, where of course likewise they are suffering dreadfully from these floods. And one of the figures that has emerged in recent days, unsurprisingly almost, we have this figure, Major Gaurav Araya. This guy is a well-known Hindutva mouthpiece. He's on almost daily, spouting and spewing Hindutva propaganda. Really, he hates the Khalistan movement. He hates the Sikh community, and he appears almost daily just spouting this really extremist, right-wing, nationalist rhetoric. And some of the things he's come out with have been absolutely outrageous. And we have covered these in the past. He's called, for example, in the US, for example, he demanded that the mafia and organised crime should actually attack the Sikh communities and break into the Sikh communities' homes and murder the Sikhs in their beds, etc. So this is the sort of guy that we're dealing with. And unsurprisingly, he had an opinion on the floods, and he actually did say, as it's being called out on his YouTube channel on the 28th of August, just a few days ago, he said that the government is deliberately closing the dams to cause the floods, and then accusing it or just claiming publicly, oh, it's just an act of God. And he, although he was mainly speaking of attacking Pakistan through the floods, he also highlighted it is directed to, generally speaking, India's enemies, which of course includes the Sikh community in the Punjab. Now, this guy, he is a former army major, and he does have a history of, and is clearly very close to Indian intelligence, because a lot of information and intelligence he does bring out on the channel clearly can only have come from the Indian government, the Indian state, and of course Indian intelligence. So clearly a lot of what he does say should be taken seriously, because clearly he has the ear of Indian intelligence. But as an individual personally, he's a very questionable character. He's standing currently under accusations of rape of his former maid, his housemaid, and further accusations that when she went public, her husband was actually murdered. And they claim by, proxy killers, hired killers of Major Araya, because she had the temerity to go to the police about this rape. So again, a fairly unpleasant character. But anyway, I'm going to quickly play you the video. It's in Punjabi, but this is what he was saying publicly on the 28th of August.
मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ, बहुत बढ़िया चीज है, पहले प्यास से मारो और फिर पानी में डुबाओ, फिर प्यास से मारो, फिर पानी में डुबाओ। अब बारिश हो रही है, मॉनसून का महीना है, वहां पे भी वाटर लेवल राइज हो रहे हैं, बिल्कुल करेक्ट समय है कि और पानी डालो, और जैसे ही मॉनसून खत्म हुई सारा पानी रोक दो, डाइवर्ट कर दो, यही चलना चाहिए इनके साथ।
So, according to the Grok translator, and I'm sure our Punjabi speakers will correct me if this is wrong, but basically he has said, in summer we open the dam gates to take water for Rajasthan, Haryana, Delhi, but in the monsoon we close them, causing the floods. Then we say it's just an act of God, no responsibility. So basically, and the heading there is the Hindutva plan to destroy Punjab or Punjab. So basically what it's saying, and this does reflect many of the accusations, in fact we've even said it ourselves on our channel, is that during the dry seasons, is that the waters flowing down from the Himalayas through all the various rivers, the water is managed so the water flows through Punjab, but is also basically stored and stocked downstream in the downstream states like Rajasthan, Haryana and Delhi, etc., to feed the needs downstream. And of course, the water table in the Punjab itself falls. So of course, there is always water shortages in the breadbasket of India. Basically, this is the area that something like 70% of industry in Punjab is agriculture. It is feeding India. But they're always short of water in the dry season because of this very reason. But likewise, conversely, in the monsoon season, when they are deluged by the monsoon rains, of course, then the dams upstream are held until they fill up to the absolute brim, and then they're released to deliberately flood and destroy the Punjab. So in other words, what Major Rai is saying is this is a deliberate tactic to starve the Punjab of water when they need it in the dry season, but in the monsoon season is to flood it and destroy Punjab by releasing that water, but then claiming, oh, it's just an act of God, it's just the weather, we can't control it. But in reality, there is an agenda behind it to deliberately do that. So now, if this is true or not, we don't know. But Major Araya, beg your pardon, this literally may be just opportunism on his part. He may have just looked at the situation, and for all we know, it may just be simple incompetence. But ultimately, he is jumpy on this, saying opportunistically, well, actually, yes, of course it's Hindutva. This is what we do. We're targeting our enemies, essentially just to drum up a bit of support from the extremist right wing. We don't know, but ultimately, the evidence does point to this potentially being a genuine situation. Now, of course, the media is full of all these accusations, and particularly Pakistan have actually stood up now officially and said, look, this is not simple incompetence. This is a deliberate tactic by India. And in Islamabad, even Reuters are reporting, they've spoken to the Pakistan government, and what they're saying is flooding in Pakistan from water flowing downstream from India was actually worsened by New Delhi's suspension of course, this Indus Rivers Treaty. Now, this treaty was removed. It was suspended after the Pahalgam terrorist attack, which India accused Pakistan of being behind. As a result, they suspended this water treaty, the Indus Waters Treaty, the IWT as it's called. Now, again, that's a whole different story. Again, we argue that it arguably was potentially a false flag operation by Indian intelligence, but India, or at least publicly, are accusing Pakistan of being behind that attack. As a result, they immediately suspended the IWT. This IWT, it was absolutely essential for the good management of the waters across the foothills of the Himalayan regions, which of course includes the Punjab on Pakistan and Indian sides. And of course, this has caused, because of what's been going on, it's caused the worst flooding in over 40 years in this part of the country. Now, the nations share rivers that originate, of course, in India and flow into Pakistan. And they're regulated for at least the last 60 years under this IWT, this treaty. But, of course, that treaty being suspended this year has caused a lot of these problems. Now, Ahsan Iqbal, he's the Pakistan's planning minister. He's gone public over recent days. And he said that data on water flows, which used to be shared by India under the treaty with Pakistan, has not been passed to Pakistan quickly enough or in sufficient detail. And this means that Pakistan, likewise in turn, are unable then to mitigate and send resources to the right places at the right time to try and reduce the damage, because they are not getting the information from India in a timely fashion. Now, of course, India has denied this. An Indian government source denied it publicly. They said, of course, there's no deliberate attempt to flood Pakistan. And they said that they were trying to stem the flow, particularly on the Ravi River, and the flow was being controlled by the Ranjit Sagar Dam upstream. And they said India is doing whatever it can be done, and all the information is being passed on. Incessant rain is causing this flood. Well, that is not in dispute. That incessant rain is ultimately the root cause of what's going on. But what the accusation is, it's not about, of course, we know the rain's falling, it's monsoon season like it does every year. The accusation is against that there is a deliberate tactic by India to cause these floods through mismanagement. And when India put the 1960 treaty into abeyance, when it did that, it then stopped the sharing of information between water officials. And instead, get this, in the old days, when the treaty was working, excuse me, the officials on both sides would literally just pick up the phone or send an email with all the key information. They pick up the phone and say, right, you need to know X, Y, Z. So that information was passed quickly in a timely fashion. What now has to happen is that this information is now sent through the embassies. So the Indian embassy in Islamabad so that information is sent from the officials to the embassy in Islamabad. The embassy in Islamabad then contacts their counterparts in Pakistan, and their counterparts then in turn pass that information to those who need to know it in the water management side in Pakistan. So you can see how this ridiculous route, which means if it'll be emails. And we all know how often inboxes fill up, and then it'll be a day or so before that email gets read and then even acted upon. And particularly, of course, in the Indian embassy in Islamabad, they're going to say, well, I'll deal with that tomorrow. It's mañana. So that's what's been happening. And again, people are dying because of this. Let's not lose sight of the impact of this. And speaking in a video statement, Iqbal, the Pakistan minister, he actually said in a video statement whilst he was actually supervising rescue and relief efforts in Kartarpur, of course, the site of that beautiful Gurdwara that was inundated under 10 feet of water. He said the water discharge is the worst example of what he terms water aggression by India. So there's no ambiguity about his accusations. He's saying this is clear, present water aggression by India. India is weaponising water. And he says India stores water on rivers and suddenly releases it. And he added that New Delhi's water aggression posed a genuine threat to lives and properties. And India has also made natural disasters a source of politics. He said India does not share information with Pakistan in a timely manner. So again, he's picked up on this, and he said it's absolutely ridiculous. And in fact, his words were, it is, very diplomatically speaking, extremely regrettable and inhumane. I think that's an understatement of what it is. And the minister's remarks refer to, of course, to the IWT, this Indus Waters Treaty, which does legally bind both countries to share this information with each other on the water discharge, because, again, people's lives are at risk because of it. But the treaty was put in abeyance by Modi's government after the Pahalgam attack. And however, since then, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in June, in a unanimous judgment binding both countries, issued a supplemental award in this case and stated that New Delhi could not unilaterally suspend the accord. Yet, of course, they have. And India basically just put two fingers up and said, what are you going to do about it? And of course, now people are dying as a result. Now, I just want to quickly wrap up the story with, and this just shows just how incessant this problem is that Baz News 2 years ago once again reported on a very similar situation. And again, this it's almost yearly, annually that we are talking about it. But even Baz News pointed to this issue 2 years ago, and they said in an article that they wrote, despite warnings, don't forget it's 2023, Punjab's drainage system has not been maintained for several decades, increasing the risk of severe flooding. So again, they're pointing, is it mismanagement or is it deliberate? We don't know. But even the drainage system in Punjab has not been maintained for several decades. Why not? Its rivers are also diverted into neighbouring areas, neighbouring states, causing Punjab to experience water scarcity, wells to run dry, and making the state the leading example of India's groundwater crisis. So, of course, even in the dry season, this deliberate mismanagement is causing problems. Curiously enough, those same dams and canals that have diverted Punjab's waters against its wishes, such as the Rajasthan feeder, have now been reportedly shut, providing no relief to a submerged Punjab. So again, accusations being levelled in 2023. Punjab, where 83% of the land is under cultivation, I beg your pardon, I thought it was 70-something, it's not, it's 83% of the land is under cultivation, and 65% of the people rely directly on agriculture, has for decades been known as India's breadbasket. Punjabi's communities, where people live off the land to feed their families and provide for their community, are in fact the model for sustainable, environmental friendly future that we need. These communities are planet defenders and were on the front line of the farmers' protest to maintain equitable farming. They successfully stopped the Indian government from enabling corporations to buy Punjab's farms en masse and halted the government's continued ecological, biological and economic infrastructure destruction in its tracks. And they said, if we don't act today, tomorrow may be too late. Well, here we are 2 years later. Yeah, it's happening all over again. And again, it just always points to the end of this story. The end of this story, of course, is we know what the solution is. The solution is very clear. We need, in the Punjab, control over Punjab's waters. And of course, that means Khalistan. We need the establishment of Khalistan. That is the only solution to end this annual disaster. I did notice, interestingly, in one of the comments, and I'll probably put this up in tomorrow's show, but somebody commented this morning, actually, just before we came on air. I didn't know this. When the British ruled India, the waters that flowed through the Punjab, when they were diverted and used in other states, those other states then paid, financially recompensed Punjab for that water. Very equitable, as it should be. When 1947 the British left, India took control. India now just takes the water. There is no financial recompense, there's no financial compensation. India, read Delhi, steals effectively the water from the Punjab and says, what are you going to do about it? Of course, there's no financial compensation. So that, I think, highlights a really serious issue. And again, why Khalistan needs to be re-established, because those waters that flow through Punjab should stay in Punjab, and if anybody wants them, then if you want them downstream, absolutely, we will. You can have it. But if you want to irrigate your crops, you're going to have to compensate us for our natural resource. Anyway, I would also refer you to the podcast, which will be released tomorrow with Dr. Gray, where we talk about this. We talk about Mahatma Gandhi specifically. Do watch it if you're interested in the truth about Mahatma Gandhi. It's very revealing and quite shocking. In fact, it's not shocking to those of us who know Gandhi, who have read about him, the truth about Gandhi. But do watch the podcast about Gandhi. But we also talk at the end, Dr. Gray gives you an interesting insight into, again, what is going on here. And the crux of what he was saying is that the engineers who control these dams and part of the water management companies, they are very highly trained individuals. But the structure, the corporate structure that is in place, they are not allowed to release water or to hold it up without any authorization from Delhi. So any decision making is not made at the sites where they need to be made by these qualified engineers. They have to pick up the phone or get on an email to Delhi and get Delhi's permission to either shut the gates or open the gates on the dams. They cannot make those decisions themselves. Why not? Delhi has to sign off, and we know what happens with that. Again, a communication chain means delay. Also, a potential decision has to be made by somebody unqualified in Delhi to make that decision. There is a clue to really what's going on there, James. I think that really just highlights that these accusations may well be true.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's no surprise that Delhi is there raping, for lack of a better word, the resources from Punjab and other regions. They just go in, help themselves and do as they please. And the impacts on the locals, they don't care about. But again, I just wanted to mention as we finish up that story, Angus, is that, organizations such as the World Sikh Organization, as well as United Sikhs and others are doing amazing work, helping and jumping in, setting up field hospitals and medical care facilities, as well as food and shelter and that for a lot of people in the region. So again, you can go online and find reliable and trustworthy organizations if you are going to contribute to any of the disaster relief funds that are out there. Just be careful of where your money's going.
Indeed, absolutely. And well done, of course, as always, to the Sikh community who are always there at the front end, the sharp end, providing aid and help to those in need in these terrible situations. Right, James, let's move on to our comments column as time marches on. And today's comments kicked off by Kashmir 2445, who says, thanks for uncovering the terrible face of the world butcher, of course, Narendra Modi. That's what we're here for, James. We are here to highlight the truth, which, of course, most Indians never get to hear about.
Exactly. And, and they don't hear it from us quite often because of the fact that we are banned in most of India. So if you don't change that setting on your phone or on your computer to another country setting, then, of course, you won't be able to see these smiling faces every 4 days a week.
Indeed, absolutely. And if you're watching from India, as I know many of you are, please do spread the word. Get people to find the ways around through YouTube, whatever, to get to see it. So we must get a larger audience within India itself, because that is the audience we need to impact most of all, of course, for obvious reasons. Right, and then we had lots of comments, and these are just a select few from M. Verdi, floods in Punjab, a creation of the Indian government. Manjit artist Mataru says, water bomb, malintentions of Indian state. Govinda Sond, Punjab will keep getting water bombed because poor governance of Indian state. The state's not helping Punjab and its people. I think really just summarises so many accusations, even amongst our own audience, that, of course, we know who's behind it. It is, it's either at best incompetence, but in likelihood it is probably a deliberate tactic. And as Jan Agra says, the Indian state are behind it. So why on earth would they help, James?
Absolutely. And I mean, it is just an atrocity as to what they are doing to perpetuate the problem and not resolve it. Indeed.
M. Verdi comes back again to say India is a mafia Raj under the pretense of democracy. Yeah, I think that the real key here is who is controlling India. And I think I did a podcast just, was it last week, about the Brahmins. Oh no, it was a story I did last week about the Brahmins who really are in control of India. Well, clearly the Brahmins are. And anybody who's in denial of that, I would refer back to that story I did covering with all the evidence laid out in black and white. There's no doubt who controls India. It is essentially the upper caste Brahmins. You can call it a mafia Raj. I mean, it's probably got several names, but ultimately, yes, it isn't really a democracy. It is only, in fact, it was the Sikh academic I referred to yesterday who said, was this in the podcast? I think it was in the story. I said that India is not a fascist state, but it is also not a democratic state. It is somewhere in between, James. I think India is almost unique in that respect.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a part of what we talk about in the past as well, is that loss of identity or the confusion over the identity, and how India is at that pivotal fork in the road where they have to decide which way they're going to go. And unfortunately, they're trying to split it down the middle and it's not working.
Yeah, and Truth is Winner, always one of our regular contributors, always likes to jump in and stir the pot. And Truth is Winner says, USA, India are natural allies and will overcome any differences. Well, actually, I think, to be honest, I think you're right, at least on the face of it. I think ultimately, when all the chips are down, India is technically a democracy. It really, and the people of India always want to be democratic, and democracy always wins in the end, as I always keep saying. So yes, I think naturally speaking, USA and the West, let's say, West and India are natural allies. Of course they are. So it's only Modi who is unnaturally, I think that's the key word, who's unnaturally dragging India towards these authoritarian regimes of Russia, of China, etc. But I think the people of India, and they will win in the end, as they always do, the people of India still view themselves as democratic, James.
Absolutely. And I think that there is, again, you're referring back to, that confusion at the crossroads. But I think that the only way to really settle it is to start opening up the votes across their nation and start it with Khalistan to allow them their sovereignty. And then you're looking at Jammu and Kashmir and other regions that will follow suit. And I think that in some ways, I understand what Modi is concerned about, but I think that he is very short-sighted, along with other politicians who maybe are afraid that their sweet ride is going to end because there is a lot of corruption going on as well. So it's, maybe not the way that they want to go to follow the exact route of the U.S., but they can cherry pick some of the best parts of the U.S. system, parts of the Canadian system, parts of the U.K. system. Well, we pretty much stole your system anyway, Angus, but but I think that it's all about the politics, whether it is geopolitical differences between the U.S. and India, and some people may perceive it as competitive spirit, or others may just see it as anger and hatred towards each other. Whatever it is, I think that there is a balance that needs to be struck in all of these relationships.
And I think Avtar Singh's comment's really interesting. How many superpower countries behind the US and how many behind India? Well, this really refers to this I would say, increasingly concerning situation of the increasing polarization. There's always been some level of polarization in the world, East and West, but ultimately it is increasingly so behind China and Russia. And of course, now we're seeing pictures of the Eastern Bloc welcoming Modi. We've got Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin hosting Narendra Modi, as well as Kim Jong-un and other despots from around the world. So, ultimately, India is being torn and it has to make this decision because the world is polarizing. And on one side, we have the Western democracies, Europe, the North America, etc., and down under, and of course, all the democratic nations on Earth. But on the other hand, we have the authoritarian despot, the communist regimes of China, Russia, these huge monolithic nations. And sadly, the world seems to be polarizing into two camps, James.
Absolutely, and that's what I was just saying there, Angus, about picking the best to decide what political sphere that India is going to follow. They have a lot of allies, but at the same time, they're trying to go down a center road and try to pick from both sides, and I don't think that's going to work long term. It might work for the time being, but overall, I think they're going to have to decide who their allies are going to be, who their trade partners are going to be, and I think there's a differentiation between those two.
Yeah, and Mohan Danoa says, and you're right to point this out, because actually, you're right, the US has been a traditional ally of Pakistan for decades. India's always been an ally of Russia, nothing new about it. Yes, you are right, of course, and even going back to the 70s, Pakistan was very close to the US. The US was, certainly from an intelligence perspective, feeding a lot of help and assistance to Pakistan. Because primarily India was essentially bankrolled by Moscow. The Gandhi dynasty was propped up by money from Moscow and the KGB. Again, it's no secret. And I'll point you to many of my podcasts I've done, particularly with Bhajan Singh Binder. If you want to know a lot of that history, it's fascinating history, actually. The stories are quite shocking, actually. So do look at the podcasts on that. Now, your final comment, I'm chuckling. Modi is never married because he's a closet homosexual. I have absolutely no idea. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's certainly, you heard it here first, James.
Hey, I saw the twinkle in his eye when he saw Trump at the G7.
Well, he's always ready to embrace Vladimir Putin. So who knows what goes on behind closed doors. But on that note, let's swiftly move on. TC, yes, this is a story I covered on Monday, actually, when James couldn't make it. This was the story of the marriage ceremony, the wedding ceremony here in the UK, that some Gurdwaras, particularly Wolverhampton, I think it was, have been selling this wedding ceremony, the Anand Karaj, to non-Sikhs. And of course, TC jumps in absolutely right and saying, look, it's farcical and it could be perceived as a mockery and deeply offensive to those that do just go through the motions. In other words, even those who are coming in to get married, actually, it's quite offensive to them. They don't realise, they actually don't fully understand the ceremony. Of course, if you're not a Sikh, of course you're not going to understand the true meaning of that ceremony. And again, it does, and I think the word here is mockery. I think it does make a mockery. Yeah, so James, in case you weren't aware of this story, it is this Gurdwara in Wolverhampton, the UK, has been selling the ceremony to non-Sikhs, essentially just to raise cash. Is it moral? Is it immoral? Does a Gurdwara have the right to do this? If it needs funds, of course it needs to repair the roof, metaphorically speaking. So it does need to raise money, but is this the right way to go about it?
I disagree with it, Angus. I don't think it's the right way. In my personal opinion, I'm not saying what's right for them, but I'm saying in my opinion, I strongly disagree with it. And you look at other religious facilities, whether it's the Catholic Church or such, they are very picky about who they allow to have ceremonies in their different religious buildings and their houses of worship. Others are more open and flexible, but there are some that are still very stuck in their ways. And I don't hold that against them. I just say, it is a house of worship and there are certain principles that it's founded upon. If you don't live by those different rituals or those beliefs, then I think that it is a slap in the face to the people that really live that lifestyle and believe that belief and live the culture.
Indeed. And rushing into our final page, as I always like to do, just a few random shout outs to our contributors. Ujaga saying, hi everyone, well hi to you as well. Sat Sri Akal to Rinku saying, thank you for your robe, Sat Sri Akal. And just to prove that my Punjabi is coming along in leaps and bounds, James, of course I can read that Punjabi. It says, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh, which indeed, Gurbajification also copies down beneath that Punjabi as well. So how's your Punjabi getting on, James?
Not that well.
Well, all I would say is Khalistan Zindabad. That's certainly some Punjabi. We do know. We will keep reiterating as often as we can. But on that note, we will bring perspectives to a close. Don't forget to keep those comments coming in. Thank you to all of you who have commented. Been loads of wonderful comments, really interesting ones. So do keep those coming in. Do let us know if there's something you wanted us to talk about. But of course, let us know your thoughts, your perspectives, your opinions, even how strongly they may be. Let us know your thoughts. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satlugetv.com if there's anything you want to bring to our attention directly. But that is it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.